Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining Pride at Work Canada for today's public panel event, Making a Global Impact. My name is Angela Facundo, and I'm the Director of Thought Leadership on Pride at Work Canada's Board of Directors. I'll be your MC today. We're pleased to provide live captioning of today's event in English and in French. Attendees will find links in the Q&A box that will open new browser windows and that will display this content. So you can access the Q&A box on the through the icon on the bottom. Members of our staff team will be active in the Q&A and are ready to help you with any technical questions you may have throughout the presentation. Please feel free to communicate in both English and in French. Today's event is being recorded and will be available on Pride at Work Canada's YouTube channel next week. So don't worry if for any reason you're unable to stay for the entire presentation, which should end promptly at 1:30 Eastern time. We will begin the event by doing a land acknowledgement. But first, I want to tell you that our topic, making a global impact, is important and timely. Many of us are realizing that LGBTQ2+ communities within Canada and within traditional territories here are in many ways leading a global conversation about diversity, inclusion, and the capacity to work. I'm a professor at Queen's, and in my place of work, I've spoken to a number of prospective PhDs around the world who want to do their research in Canada because their object of study is sexuality or feminist studies, and they come from countries where they don't have academic freedom. Homosexuality is illegal, or female sexuality is taboo, or any kind of talk about diversity is considered radical. And what they study politically threatens their chances of getting hired, potentially. This challenge to bring this conversation on a global stage is a difficult and necessary step, as we encounter only more difference and more diversity, as resulting intersectionality complicates and enriches cross-cultural dialogue. So again, I want to thank you for acknowledging the importance of this difficult challenge with your presence here today. As a director on the board of Pride at Work Canada, I want to acknowledge that we carry out our work on the traditional territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, which includes Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people. Our organization recognizes that there are multiple barriers that prevent many Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Indigenous people from accessing meaningful, affirming, and inclusive employment. In our work, we look to reduce those barriers and are open to feedback from Indigenous workers, employers, and job seekers in making that a reality. While today we welcome panelists from many regions, I'm located in Toronto, known as Tkaronto, which is the dish with one spoon territory. It is traditionally the home of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto is home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Pride at Work Canada, we are a membership agency for employers. We work with a network of over 150 companies that share our commitment to queer and trans inclusion in Canadian workplaces. Pride at Work Canada is thankful for the support of one of those members today, Microsoft. Without their generous support, this event would not be possible. Our next remarks will be from a business leader who leverages a passion for technology and its potential to inspire organizations of all sizes across Canada. He helps businesses truly reimagine what's possible and how they can unlock the opportunity to do amazing things for their employees, for their customers, and the world. Please join me in welcoming Head of Modern Work and Security Business for Microsoft, Jason Brommet.
Good morning, everybody. Angela, thank you for that great introduction. I'm really humbled to be here today on behalf of Microsoft. When we think about our mission of empowering every organization and every person on the planet to achieve more, this conversation is foundational to that. In the world in which we're all living today of this digital everything and digital work, the needs to be more inclusive actually require us to have a little more intentionality. And I think today is a great opportunity to have a great discussion with the esteemed panelists that you can see in the video alongside or behind me. I thought I would just start with a couple of quick comments, and I won't belabor this. First, when I think about inclusion in its broadest frame of reference, I think about it as on two dimensions. First and foremost, it is our shared and collective responsibility to all play a role. And I think today, hopefully you are inspired with some thoughts that each of us can take away on how we can affect inclusion in our workplaces, and generally, I'll say, in our lives. The second, for those that work for companies or lead companies, this is a business opportunity. There's lots of great research that's broadly available from any number of resources, which is companies with inclusive cultures truly do benefit from greater outputs, greater employee engagement, higher intent to stay, and tend to be much more innovative and agile. At the end of the day, when we think about this and the way that we often think about it as Microsoft, which is if you are not intentionally including people, you're accidentally excluding people. In a way, technology can adapt to empower all humans. Humans shouldn't have to adapt to the technology itself. And when we truly think about it, innovation is, or inclusion is a driver of innovation in so many different ways. And again, you'll hopefully hear some thoughts and some inspiration today. When we think about an inclusive culture, it's one that really encourages everyone to belong, recognizes there's some reasons that people may feel they're unable to, but it's about also actively working to identify those reasons so that the barriers can be removed. From a Microsoft perspective, it's our commitment to our mission, but it's about inclusivity and empowerment for all of our employees for the reason that we're here today and our 5-year relationship with Pride at Work. And I couldn't be more excited to kick today's event off. Very quickly, before I hand back over to Angela and the rest of the panelists, I really think about technology as an equalizer, but also an enabler. Today, this event's being streamed through Microsoft Teams, and Teams provides an incredible platform to connect people of all different backgrounds, nationalities, races, sexual orientations, genders, especially more important today in a world where we are all so digital and obviously highly remote. But it's about also creating empowerment for accessibility, and captioning is a great way to think about that. But it's about how you then use it to create diverse networks of people and being able to build bridges across organizations and across boundaries. In some ways, now more than ever, especially given some of the mental health research I've just read over the last few days, it can't be more profoundly responsible of all of us to do that. But it's also a great way to express our authentic selves. And there's many ways that we can do it. You'll probably have seen for some Microsoft employees and LinkedIn profiles of those that you may know, but we certainly have done it inside the organization. Being able to create custom backgrounds that reflect who we are, what we stand for, what we believe in, but also being able to change our profile pictures to reflect the rainbow as an example. Many of us have those today. But most importantly, and this is what today is all about, which is inclusion needs to start with leadership. And I'm not just talking about leaders in companies. Certainly myself, I think about it as a deep responsibility I have as an individual, but as a leader inside Microsoft, but for each of us as individuals. It's what today is about. And I'll leave you with these 5 things. One, which is we all need to be experts at examining our unconscious bias. 2, we need to stop making assumptions. 3, we need to be curious. 4, we need to pay attention. And most importantly, maybe number 5, which is we need to be brave and we need to be humble. And so with that, Angela, I'll hand it back over to you. Again, thank you so much for investing the time today. It was my pleasure to kick off this morning's event.
Thank you so much for that, Jason. I really appreciated those thoughtful remarks, particularly this emphasis that technology can and should be human-centered. It is a global connector, and this is a huge leadership opportunity that we have to act on now. So we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Thank you very much, Jason. A big thank you to Microsoft for the company's leadership in this space and for the spirit of collaboration they bring to their work with us at Pride at Work Canada. If your employer is not yet a member of Pride at Work Canada, I encourage you to follow Microsoft's example and get in touch with our staff, get in touch with our team about how you can engage with our programs. Now, unfortunately, Doug Kerr is unable to join us today last minute, so stepping in for Doug will be Pride at Work Canada's very own Executive Director, Colin Druhan. Colin, I leave this conversation in your capable hands, and I'll see everyone at the end of today's panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Angela. As you mentioned, Doug's not able to be with us here today, which is unfortunate. Doug Kerr is the Executive Director of Dignity Network Canada, a national coalition of organizations across Canada interested in advancing the human rights of LGBTQ people globally. Over the past 5 years, he's worked closely with civil society organization and Global Affairs Canada to launch Canada's first major international LGBTQ funding initiative, a $30 million set of programs to be launched in 2020 and 2021. So while Doug is really most qualified to be leading the panel today with our outstanding panelists, I do bring a passion for the subject at hand, and I'll do my best to fill his shoes as best I can. So what I'll do is I'll start by introducing some of our panelists, and then I'll lead us through several questions, some for all of the panelists, some for them individually. And then at the end of our discussion, I really want to make sure that there's lots of time for our audience to ask questions using the Q&A function that was mentioned by Angela in the introduction. So I want to introduce our panelists. First, we have Meg French. Meg is a proven leader and passionate human rights advocate with a deep commitment to social justice. Meg is currently the Executive Director of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, which is a dynamic, collaborative feminist organization with an unwavering commitment to supporting grassroots organizations across Africa in countries hardest hit by the AIDS pandemic. Before joining the Stephen Lewis Foundation, Meg worked with UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, for 17 years to protect and promote children's rights. Most recently, she was based in Geneva, leading the organization's global campaign to improve maternal and newborn health. Before moving to Geneva in 2017, Meg was Chief Program Officer at UNICEF Canada. There she led communications and programmatic work and advocacy efforts with the Government of Canada. Under her leadership, UNICEF Canada also launched the One Youth Initiative to improve child and youth well-being in Canada. So one of the things that I miss about in-person events, this is when everybody would give Meg a huge round of applause, not just for being here, but for all of the great work that she's done across her career. So thanks, Angela, for doing it silently for me. Next, I'd love to introduce John Galligan, who leads Microsoft's Global Government Affairs team, whose role is to support the company's international network of corporate affairs professionals in their public policy advocacy outreach, as well as developing global campaigns to promote the trusted, responsible, and inclusive use of technology. In addition to this role, John also co-leads CLA Pride, the LGBTI employee network for the Corporate, External, and Legal Affairs Department. Prior to this role, John was Microsoft's Regional Director of Government Relations based in Singapore, where he coordinated the company's public policy, government affairs, and industry relations across the Asia-Pacific region. John is the current board member of the Public Affairs Council and the US ASEAN Business Council, and member of the Advisory Committee for the Partnership on Global LGBTI Equality. He holds degrees in business communications from the Queensland University of Technology and Political Science from the Australian National University. He lives with his husband in Seattle, Washington. While he's tuning in from the United States, those of us in Canada certainly won't hold that against him. Thank you so much, John, for being here with us today. Again, a nice big silent round of applause for John, not just for being here today, but for all of his professional accomplishments. Last but not least, we have Masa Kateb, who is the manager of projects at the Refugee-led Jumpstart Refugee Talent, where she helps resettled refugees on the West Coast fulfill their potential in Canada's economy and find meaningful work that complements their professional skills. At the Canadian Council for Refugees, she is a steering committee member of the Overseas Protection and Resettlement Working Group. Masa started her career in the areas of marketing and journalism, serving as the senior regional marketing executive for Hertz in Dubai, looking after the Middle East and Africa region. Volunteering for the United World College's International Boarding Schools movement and working as a journalist for the Syria-based Baladna newspaper. In her spare time, she pursues her passions in community organizing for human rights and as a traditional Syrian storyteller. Masa earned a bachelor's in economics from Damascus University and is a board director at the Playwrights Theatre Centre in Vancouver. Everybody join me in welcoming Masa, who I have such gratitude to Masa for not just the work that she does today and the work that she's done throughout her career, but for introducing me to the mentorship program at Jumpstart Refugee Talent, through which I was matched with a mentee that I've been having a great relationship with over the last few weeks. So very pleased to have Masa and all of our panelists here today. So I want to start off with a few formal questions that will go out to all of our panelists. So maybe for the first one, we'll start with Meg, go to John, and then to Masa, just in alphabetical order by last name to get their thoughts. So I encourage the three of you to please unmute yourselves so we can hear your wonderful voices. And just to start off, I wonder if each of you could provide an overview of the work that your organization does in relation to the theme of today, making a global impact. So how does your organization make a global impact? And as I said, we'll start with you, Meg.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. And I'm really pleased to be here. I think it's going to be a really great conversation and an important one. So just, to answer your question and to build on a bit what you read when you were reading my bio, the Stephen Lewis Foundation it was created to get resources directly into the hands of community-based organizations who are working on the front lines of HIV/AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa. And so what that's meant is that since 2003, we've partnered with about 325 community-based organizations. We've supported 1,800 initiatives, and these are initiatives and organizations that are located across 15 African countries who are hardest hit by the global AIDS pandemic. The partners that we work with really work at the intersection of HIV and human rights, and they provide holistic support, so dealing with everything from HIV testing and care to mental health support, to support for education, really also the multitude of ways that HIV has an effect on communities. And when we look specifically at LGBTIQ communities, since 2017, we've partnered with 15 organizations in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And last year alone, they reached about 40,000 individuals. And that holistic response is really critical to the work that the community-based organizations we support provide. And we really have a firm belief, and our experience has shown that community-based organizations led by communities themselves really are best placed to drive that change. So our grassroots LGBTIQ organizations provide stigma-free health services. They provide peer mentorship, mental health support, human rights training, legal services. And I think one of the things that makes the Stephen Lewis Foundation different from many other international development organizations is that we really are concerned about ensuring that our partner organizations have the flexible, reliable funding that they need, and we want to support their sustainability. And so that means not just supporting the projects that they have, but also supporting the organization themselves. So staff salaries, rent, their security needs, and also the emotional and well-being of the staff and volunteers themselves. I'm going to leave it at that because I know we're tight on time, and I want to make sure we have lots of time for conversation.
Great, thank you very much, Meg. I'm struck by the numbers that you mentioned. 40,000 individuals is a huge impact. So thank you very much for all the work that you do. I'm really excited to hear more details about how the programs are delivered directly to folks. We'll move on to John. John, would you like to give us a little background about other than your extensive bio of all of the great accomplishments that you have under your belt. Maybe tell us a little bit about what you're doing these days.
Well, thanks, Colin, for the question, and more importantly, thanks to Pride at Work for the invitation today, and greetings everyone from Seattle. Sort of to your question about global impact, this comes back to what Jason shared in the introductions around Microsoft's mission, and just to repeat that, our mission is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. So I'm not quite sure it gets more global and hopefully aspirational in terms of impact than that. And while it's a big ambition, over 40-something years, 45 years, we've had it as an organization, we have a pretty good opportunity to realize it, or at least make sure that we don't set ourselves a goal that is beyond reach. We have a pretty extensive connection to people and organizations around the world, not just through our, let's call it, core technology. Most folks would be familiar with Windows, and we connect to 1 billion people every day through that platform alone. But some mightn't be aware that, through our LinkedIn subsidiary, we are, working with 600 million professionals every day, many who are probably on the call today. We're helping, 200 million young gamers on Minecraft, another platform that we just get to reach out and inspire so many young people. But we have like 70 million enterprise customers around the world. Many are in Canada, of course. But we're really empowered by this 160,000 employees that we have across 190 countries. So when we think about, sort of this enormous opportunity and responsibility we have, we take that mission sort of as our sort of North Star, our guiding light for everything we do. And while we're focused on, individuals and organizations, we're also these days particularly sort of focused on the planet itself. And there are 4 pillars that the company really has sort of, or principles, should I say, that sort of drives everything we do. And these have been articulated by our CEO, a number of times. And that is, we've got to sort of start to earn, trust and retain that trust, not just in technology, but the way in which our company does business and our industry does business. And you can see the stress that both technology and the tech industry is under these days, particularly given some of the circumstances we're finding ourselves. But, a big part of that is about also promoting inclusive opportunity. That's not just thinking about accessible technology, but that's thinking about everything we can do as a company to sort of provide opportunities, economic opportunities, social opportunities, to really sort of use our resources to sort of scale that opportunity for people around the world. Most importantly, and this is probably a more recent principle that's been applied to our operating framework, is about preserving fundamental rights. We just see how strained human rights and individual liberties are around the world, particularly here, and most notably in the last few months, which we've noticed here in the United States, to remind us that our work around civil rights is never finished, and that those fundamental rights need to be protected around the world. And as I mentioned before, the final one is around driving sustainability, not just what we do as a company, but helping promote that amongst that enormous, let's call it, user base and customer base that we have. But while that's a global in scope, we really focus very, very much around how we can create local surplus in all those 190 countries in which we operate. And that, sense of purpose and mission really, is not just how we sort of develop our products and deploy our products, but it really is about the policy and practices we adopt as a company in how we sort of commit to causes and communities around the world. And, I'm just pleased to be able to have a dialogue today around how some of those policies and practices are being applied to the LGBTQ+ community, not just here in Canada, but around the world, and how our insights and experiences and the way in which others have taught us that we can develop and hone those practices and policies to have even greater impact as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John. I'm really struck by, talking about all of the impact that Microsoft has in terms of customers and folks who kind of engage with various platforms. And it's nice for me to hear you talk about that as an opportunity, but also a responsibility for you to articulate it that way. I think sets a great example for a lot of other employers that are listening in today. So thank you so much for that. Masa, last but not least, I would love to hear you answer our introductory question. How does your organization make a global impact?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And for moderating this discussion on the spot. Appreciate it. And thanks to Pride at Work for all the great work that you do in Canada. It's truly inspiring to see that such an organization exists for me, where I'm originally from Syria, so coming to Canada and seeing how the world operates and how people speak about human rights and actually take action towards their beliefs is definitely a drive for me. So Jumpstart Refugee Talent is a refugee-led nonprofit organization, and we are the only organization in Canada that specifically focuses on the economic inclusion of refugees in the economy, facilitating and supporting meaningful employment for refugees. As we truly believe that it's at the core of the holistic integration of refugees who are forcefully displaced out of their home countries and now living in their resettled country in Canada, or in their resettled countries anywhere else around the world as well. It applies to all refugees, of how finding meaningful work actually gets people to be more integrated into society and for them to stand up on their feet, as well as to support the economy of the country that they are living in. All of our programming is serving refugees regardless of their status, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, as long as they are eligible to work in Canada. And in terms of the global, so all the work that we do has a global impact, as we are connected to all refugee networks globally. We are connected to the handful of sister organizations worldwide that does what we do, which is again focusing on the economic inclusion of refugees. So we constantly share our learnings with each other, get inspired by each other's work. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We live in a world that is trying to figure out how to deal with a global refugee crisis. And us as refugee-led, we support other refugee-led organizations, and we want to claim our space in being part of the conversation and represent the community with governments as well as with organizations in the corporate sector to support the inclusion of refugees. Our finding, throughout the advocacy that we do with support of refugees' economic inclusion, we were in conversations with the Canadian government, and we had our founding director actually be the very first refugee to ever enter the room in Geneva with the UN as part of the Canadian delegation, which is, yes, it's too late maybe, but then it's great that it's happening and it's a fantastic step. And then Canada challenged other countries around the world to do similar things and to have refugees be part of the conversation where refugees are being spoken about. Like, imagine a conference about Indigenous folks without anyone who's Indigenous in the room. So Canada was the very first country to actually bring in a refugee into the delegation. And then for us now to be part in leading the conversation of supporting refugees. All of our programmings support the inclusion of refugees, but in regard to our audience here today, I want to speak about our Refugee Talent Hub, which is the bridging gap between the corporate sector and the refugee talent, where now with our new launched tech arm, Hire Me, we support employers who actively want to include refugees within their diversity and inclusion mandate and connect them to vetted, skilled refugees who can take on their positions and actually do the work within their capacity and be part of the society in their capacity. So I'm going to leave here. I have so many different things that I want to talk about, but also understanding the time frames. So I'll get it back to you, Colin.
Thank you, Masa. And there's so much to talk about just in your opening remarks there, and we'll get to all of them. But I really do appreciate all the work that Jumpstart Refugee Talent does, and I think it's so important to underscore. Not a lot of the efforts that you're talking about are led by refugees from their lived experience, which is one of the things that I think is just so perfectly wonderful about your organization. So, getting on to our next question to everybody before we kind of take a specific dive into the work that each of you do. I know Pride at Work Canada, we work in workplace inclusion, and one of the things that I notice is that a lot of the conversations that we have about inclusion, they're often led by people from their lived experience. So people often talk about wanting to be able to put a picture of their spouse on their desk, or they want to be able to use washroom facilities that they feel comfortable and safe in. But sometimes the conversation it kind of focuses a lot on what's happening in the work environment presently. And in my opinion, not enough on what's going outside of the office or outside of the workplace itself. And that's one of the reasons that drew us to the conversation today. Could each of you give an example of ways that Canadian workplaces can help advance human rights and inclusion for LGBTQ2 people internationally, thinking outside of their own immediate work environment, or maybe things they can do inside their work environment? Thinking about Canadian workplaces, you know, some organizations might be multinationals, which is really important for us to remember, or have business relationships outside of Canada's, possibly with suppliers or partners. So obviously they really need to be thinking global, but also for Canadian companies and organizations who do not have international branches, and they don't necessarily have those international connections. So looking for kind of you know, a broad spectrum of answers that might apply to one or more of those setups. So Meg, maybe we'll start back with you and hear what you have to say about this question about what can employers do today.
Sure. So, you know, what I would talk about is the need for employers to think about how they engage their employees, how they think about their corporate social responsibility, and the impact that their organization and their employees are having on the communities around them. And I would argue that while community is the local community that you live in, community is also the global community in which we live. And when we think about human rights, and when we think about what we can do as individuals and as corporations to realize human rights, that this is really a global conversation, and one that needs not just to look at home, but also look internationally as well. And I think in terms of the Stephen Lewis Foundation, you know, what we're hearing from our partners in Sub-Saharan Africa is that there is an urgent need for support right now. I mean, not only are they you know, dealing with laws and community practices that discriminate against LGBTIQ individuals in their countries, but the impact of COVID-19 in particular has also made all of that worse in many ways, that LGBTIQ individuals are being blamed for the existence of COVID, that the limitations on movement have caused individuals to have to move home where they're facing discrimination and violence. There's difficulty accessing medicines, HIV, sexual health services. And so in order to be able to respond to this need and to the real drastic underfunding of LGBTIQ individual or organizations in Sub-Saharan Africa, we've launched the Partners in Pride campaign. And it's really a response to the needs of our partners to have the support that they require in order to make economic change, but also address the urgent, immediate needs of their communities as well. And so over the next 3 years, we're aiming to raise $3 million to increase the support to our existing partners, but also to reach out to more community-based organization as well, so that they can change and work with governments to change policies, but they can also provide immediate support to their communities as well, and you know, support the activism and the LGBTIQ human rights movement in Africa. The Partners in Pride campaign is one that has a lot of flexibility in it in terms of how Canadians and organizations might engage. At its most easiest, I guess, there is a donation page where people can go online. They can make a personal donation. They can donate on behalf of a corporation. You can make a donation for a friend or a colleague, send them a thank you as an e-card and make a donation in their honor. And we would really like to talk to workplaces about how to have a more personalized way to support Partners in Pride, because I think that there's opportunity not just for the funding piece, which absolutely is critical, but also the awareness raising and to engage workplaces in conversations around human rights, around the health and rights of LGBTIQ communities. And it's, it'd be an interesting conversation to talk about what the experience is in Canada and what the experience looks like around the world, and to raise awareness about these things, because I think one of the things that COVID-19 has reinforced for us as a global community is how interconnected we are, and how important it is to ensure that there is an equity in access to care, to support, and also that the rights of individuals really must be realized in an equal way around the world as well. So the Partners in Pride is something that we're really excited about, and we launched it just back in, I guess, May at this point. And we've had a great response, and we would really love to continue to work with Canadians, individuals, and corporations on providing that support to these local community-based organizations in sub-Saharan Africa who are inspiring, are doing amazing work. And what they need is the funding to continue to do their work, to be sustainable, and for us to step back and let them really make the change that's needed in their communities.
Great, thank you, Meg. So Partners in Pride is the campaign, and we'll certainly make sure that all of our attendees today get some links and some more information about that when we do follow up after today's event. And I love what you said about, certainly you're looking for funds for the campaign, so it's great for companies to write those checks. But I get a lot of emails from folks who lead employee resource groups who right now are looking for things for their group to do, become more engaged, learn more about. And I love what you said about, it's great to give the resources, it's great to donate the money, but then also become invested in the work that folks are doing and learn more about, the state of the LGBT community globally. What a great way to kind of deepen your understanding of the community as somebody who's making change within your own workplace. So thank you very much for that, Meg. John, let's move on to you. What are some examples of ways, taking a cue from the work that you do at Microsoft, what can Canadian workplaces do to help advance human rights and inclusion for LGBTQ people globally?
Yeah, Colin, I think the first step is knowing where you stand and what you'll stand for. Look, for any multinational company, it's pretty evident that we're living in both a multicultural and multi-constituent world. And indeed, I think just the last few years have demonstrated just how diverse and in some ways parochial some of those interests are being brought to the surface. We're seeing a retreat in the rights of our communities around the world as nations sort of almost close in on themselves. And for companies working sort of across borders, what is clear is that you can't have a one-size-fits-all when it comes to supporting any community, but particularly the LGBTQ plus community. And that's just sometimes the nature of business. A company's value and sometimes a company's values are not always going to be mutually aligned, particularly when applied in that very multicultural, multi-constituent world. And we often, in this community talk about intersectionality, and I think that's a great sort of theme to apply to a multinational. How is a commercial organization going to meet its business goals while also, aspiring to be diverse and inclusive and then be an agent for change? Some of those issues aren't always in neat balance. And we're constantly, I think as a company, sort of seeing where those expectations are converging. And sometimes they converge, very well, and sometimes they're in conflict. And we're constantly having to navigate, social, economic, and cultural terrains. And now we're dealing with an unexpected terrain when we think about just, public health. So for companies like ours, and I'm sure many who are on the call today, we're all living in these very different, environments where different laws and different cultures apply. And so we have to sometimes have a differentiated approach to the policies and programs we deploy across the world. We don't have the same sort of pay scales for everyone across the world. And so in many ways, I think we're sort of like having to accept that there is a level of unevenness about the way in which we're going to progress the rights of our communities across the world. That doesn't mean, say, accepting the status quo. That just means sort of like knowing, as I said, where we're starting from, knowing where we stand and what we're going to stand for. And so in many ways, we need to probably have, at the early stage, an uneven approach in an uneven world. But one thing that's really been a helpful guide for us has been this report that came about 4 years ago. It was released at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos by the Center for Talent and Innovation, called Out in the World. And it's really about securing the LGBT rights in the global marketplace. It's designed for companies, but I think it could be designed for any organization. And really, that's about sort of how a organization is looking at the environment it's working from a legal and cultural, socio-cultural environments around 3 different continuum, like on a continuum or axis. This when in Rome is when companies sort of adhere to the local, norms and natures, laws and norms in their jurisdiction. The second one is the Emcee model, which is around sort of creating more pro-LGBT policies within their own walls, should I say, but maybe not necessarily pushing for change in the wider community. And finally, companies that adopt what they call an advocate model, and that's really about how they're using their voice, their brand, their influence to seek change outside the company. And knowing where you are on that continuum is incredibly helpful to know what actions and interventions you can take. And it may seem a very sort of like simplistic model, but it's actually quite a confronting exercise, because you think you may be in one posture, and on closer inspection, you may be in another. And certainly, as I mentioned earlier, we operate in 190 countries, and we'd love to think that we are advocacy, everywhere. But in many cases, we found ourselves, increasingly, in certain jurisdictions that we were operating when in Rome. We were just not necessarily sort of like, living up to the values our employees were looking for, but let alone, I think, outside stakeholders as well. And so the real objective here is not to sort of like, settle, is to how you move up that continuum from when in Rome to advocacy. And from Microsoft, we are accepting sort of like embassy by default, but advocacy by aspiration. And that's really about sort of, again, sort of having a diagnostic of where you sit on that continuum and what are your processes and approaches to sort of move you up that access to a more advocacy by design approach.
Thank you, John. Know where you stand and what you stand for. I'm going to steal that and put it on a t-shirt. Are you okay with that?
Very much so.
We'll put Microsoft's logo on it. Masa, again, last but not least, and we'll switch around the order so that you're not always at the tail end of these questions, but what are your thoughts of the question at hand?
First of all, that's total. I have no problem in whichever order. Everything has a lot of value, and what John and Meg said are like, I want to echo that, and it's really, really important from how I see it for people to know where they are. Like, yes, we are corporations and companies and organizations, but at the very core, we're all human. And when we connect to our own cores and values as individuals, and we decide on which side do we stand on when it comes to, like, on which side of the history do you stand from perspective, then you'll be able to take your next step with intention. Because if we're just walking the world aimlessly, things are not going to unfold how we would want them to. So being intentional is very important, whether it's for you don't have to be in a managerial position. So just basically standing up for your colleague, or like having a conversation with someone who you felt that were kind of discriminated against at a meeting, or just, speaking up for those who are not in a place of speaking. Because not everyone, like, yes, we live in Canada, but then not everyone can speak up. And it's something not to be taken for granted. It's very, very valuable. So speaking up and standing up for what's right, and then driving that as an individual within the entity that you work in. And then whether you have a diversity and inclusion department, for you to take action and speak to them. Conversations are very important, and being transparent is very important. So what is it that you need if you were to be someone from the LGBT community? What is it that you need that could support your existence within your workplace? Have conversations with people you trust, and then carry on that conversation internally, and someone will take it and will take an action on it. I mean, I got to learn being in Canada that people actually really want to help and people want to do something, but then oftentimes they don't know which doors to knock on or what to do. And it's great to see with Meg's call to action, for example, like there is something that is being done, and if you want to support, there is something to do. And then for us with Jumpstart, our work with advocacy when it comes to refugees, and it kind of focuses on changing the narrative, because so far, like the world wasn't really prepared for the refugee crisis. So we're all trying to figure it out at the same time. So when it comes to even to diversity inclusion departments or to settlement in general in Canada, refugees are being overlooked under the pool of newcomers. Like even for me, when I came to Canada, I didn't want to say that I am a refugee. I see how refugees are treated all around the world. I just wanted to be a newcomer and fit in. But then I'm so grateful that I got to work with Jumpstart as a refugee-led organization, and for me to stand up and go like, you know what, yes, I am a refugee, and that is not something that I am ashamed of. You know, being a refugee means that you have resiliency, that you have decision-making on the spot, critical thinking, whether it's on a subconscious or a conscious level. So taking that and using it and investing in it as an opportunity of growth for organizations to specifically hire refugees. We challenge, and we have been doing a lot of advocacy and education for folks to include refugees within their diversity and inclusion departments in their mandate, and not just say newcomers or like fall under people of color. They are extremely vulnerable refugees, specifically LGBTQ plus refugees. And we live in a world where, unfortunately, especially with the Western mentality, people think that if you are vulnerable, it means that you are not talented. And with our advocacy, with the vulnerability of refugees, again, specifically in the vulnerability of LGBTQ plus refugees, they are extremely talented. So taking that and then using it as a drive to improve how you are living, not just within your corporate or business world, but then also in your daily life, will have an impact. At the end, we all live and breathe the same air on this earth, and we are all putting an impact into the fabric of the universe. So how are we as individuals growing that impact into something of a legacy that we want to leave ahead of us? It is all in your hands.
Thank you, Masa. That's quite beautiful. And it makes me think, I know that recently we had Coming Out Day, which I saw a lot of people sharing about on social media. And certainly whenever that day comes around, my heart goes out to folks who don't feel safe enough to come out, or don't feel that their workplace or their home or their their community, it's not a good fit for them to come out right now. So I always feel for those folks whenever Coming Out Day comes around and people are vocal about those stories. And I think about you talking about almost coming out as a refugee and using that term to identify yourself. So I think about too, we hear a lot of stories about people coming out, and we think about what it does for them, but I also think about what it does for the people around them, for them to get new, dispel stereotypes and myths about what it means to be a member of the LGBT community. So I think about the same thing where folks are more, proud to call themselves refugees, to talk about their experiences. It helps people with those, people who have, prejudice or bias against people who are refugees, helps them better understand that experience. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, definitely. It's, and I think a big part of it is the community. Everyone thinks of what's around them, and then oftentimes not really be able to focus on where they are. So for example, when it comes to folks from the LGBT community coming out, or like starting off with it being called coming out, rather than just being, you have to flag something to be. It kind of changes the focus from the person to invest in their own capacities, rather than spend their energy thinking about what this person is going to think or how this person is going to react. So hopefully by us as individuals being more open, more supportive, and more inclusive, and showing that, not just thinking it and keeping it within our minds, but actually acting with it and having it as part of our existence, as part of the company's vision, mission, or values, not just to talk the talk, but to actually walk the walk and be intentional on the ground, then that creates space for folks to be who they are, whether they are refugees, whether they are queer, whether, you know, however they want to identify, that then they can just be themselves and then put on their professional hat and just be professional and do the work that they want to work without really having things kind of poke or like have them feel like being discriminated against. Does that?
Yeah, thank you, Masa. That's very powerful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So Meg, I have a question that's specific to your work. Your organization, the Stephen Lewis Foundation, works directly with groups in the Global South, in East and Central Africa specifically, around advancing LGBTQI human rights and, as you mentioned, addressing the HIV/AIDS crisis. So you have nearly 20 years of experience in this work. What has your organization learned over the years around the role that Canadians, whether it's our government, Canadian organizations, businesses, or individual residents of Canada, what role can we play in supporting these global movements? And what are some of the strategies for people, governments, and organizations in the global north who want to help internationally?
Sure. So I guess, so at the SLF, we talk a lot about solidarity, not charity. And I think that working in solidarity really means focusing on relationships, on power dynamics, on responsibilities. And so that, you know, really examining what you do, and I would say this is true at whether you're talking at a national or global level in terms of the kind of support that you provide as an individual or as an organization, addressing those power dynamics and figuring out sort of how you are trying to sort of shift some of the paradigms around colonialism and racism, you know, in the work that you support is a really important conversation, and it is a hard conversation. It can be a hard conversation, but it's an important conversation for people to have, and I would say that's true for the government, and that's true for companies, and that's true for individuals. And so we at the Stephen Lewis Foundation have, you know, and I'm not saying that we do it perfectly either. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation that we have with staff, with our partners, with our supporters about how we do this work in a different way. But I can share some of the learnings that we've had through our work doing that. And what we have learned is that deep and long-lasting impact is really generated when we support grassroots organizations that are run by and run for impacted communities. And that if we support those organizations so that they can deliver holistic programming that addresses the broad range of issues. So it's not, if it, you know, in the context of HIV, it's not just about getting drugs or getting testing, but it's about all the other, you know, economic supports that they need, food support, mental health support, human rights support, all of those things. That holistic response really makes a difference for communities, and the community organizations have that trust within the communities and the experience to know how best to address those issues. We've learned that funding partnerships really need to be long-term relationships, and that the funding that we provide should be flexible and it should be responsive to our partners' needs, so that they can shape how they serve their communities. And part of that, again, is this being conscious of the underlying power dynamics that happen between like a funder and a recipient relationship, and that there is a need to address the legacy of colonialism that we often see in international development, where the funder, you know, comes with the idea that they know best, or that they, you know, that there's some specific standards that they want to see met by the agency that they're providing the funding to, rather than recognizing the experience and the knowledge and the trust and the skill that those local organizations have, and allowing them to drive the programs. We've also really learned about the importance of investing in organizations themselves. I talked a little bit about this before, but it's really a critical piece that many funders, and so whether that's, you know, as a corporation or as a government will, or as individuals even, we see this interest in funding a specific project, if you will. And the problem with that is that it does not allow organizations to have the funding. Where do they get the funding to pay their staff, to pay their rent, to pay for audit costs? You want financial transparency, but how are they funding that type of thing? So that kind of core funding is really important. And when it comes to LGBTIQ organizations in particular, but we do see this across all of our partners, there's a real need to also have emergency funds available, so that there's unexpected costs that can come up. And so for LGBTIQ organizations, they often face theft, they faced raids, there's arrests in response to their activism. And so at the SLF, we ensure that we have funding available so that we can strengthen office security, so we can replace equipment, so we can provide, cover legal fees of LGBTIQ leaders as well. So that piece is really important. And then the last learning I think that I would raise here is it's in a little bit of a different vein, but it's the importance of mental health programming. And we really don't see the same sort of support for mental health programming that we do for other types of health programming. And it is so critical. And we've really heard from our community-based organization about this desperate need for funds to provide support, not only for their communities, but also for themselves, their staff, and their volunteers. Recently, we heard from a partner in Kenya that works with lesbian, bisexual, and queer women. And they shared with us how, in the context of COVID, they're kicked out of their homes, they're being ostracized, and so they're left homeless, dependent on transactional sex to meet their basic needs, and really desperately seeking mental health support. And so our community-based partners are providing that kind of support and are really reliant on organizations like the Stephen Lewis Foundation, who have flexibility in their funding to meet these kinds of needs that are outside of the more traditional funding. And we're seeing increasingly fewer dollars available for organizations as either funders pivot to fund COVID-19 specific issues. And then generally when it comes to HIV/AIDS programming, over the years, there's been a feeling that this is, this was an issue of the past and the funding needs aren't as great. And we know that's not to be true. And the last thing I'd just finish up by saying is the other piece is about listening. And it's about hearing the voices of the people who are doing this work and the people whose needs you want to support. And so it's not often that I do panels like this, because we really, as the Stephen Lewis Foundation, really want to have the voices of our community partners at the forefront. And we are hosting next week on the 27th at 11 o'clock Eastern Time, a webinar specifically on championing mental health programs for LGBTI communities. And we'll have two leaders from our partners in Uganda and Kenya who will speak specifically about their experience and the work of their partners as well. And anyone is welcome to join us for that webinar.
Great, thank you, Meg. We'll certainly share those details with our audience and with our members at Pride at Work Canada. The word that stood out to me the most from what you were saying is the word trust. And I think that is something that today is in short supply. I find there's less trust in some governments than before, and some of our public institutions, and that's made COVID particularly difficult situation for a lot of countries, Canada included. So it's really wonderful to hear that idea of building trust with folks by working with the community organizations that know them best. That really stood out to me, and I'm really interested to attend the event on the 27th to learn more directly from the partners that you work with. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Masa, so I'm curious, as we've spoken about, refugees face challenges and issues when they leave their country of origin, and LGBTQI refugees face some particular challenges. Could you speak about the kinds of issues that LGBTQ or any refugees to Canada face, and the kinds of support they need once they arrive in Canada and once they kind of establish themselves here? What have you learned in your own experience working for Jumpstart, which is, as you mentioned, the only national organization working to support employment and entrepreneurial opportunities specifically led by refugees?
Thank you, Colin. Being a refugee and working for a refugee-led got me to see all the systematic barriers that refugees face. And they are definitely more than what I had anticipated. Even coming to Canada, I got to learn that there are systematic barriers within the refugee communities of how refugee claimants are different than private sponsored refugees or government assisted refugees. But when it comes to queer, like LGBTQ plus refugees in specific, they live a life outside of Canada before they come, where they are in their survival mode all throughout their lives, and then they come to Canada. And people think and expect that the second people land, that things are now okay and you're off on your feet, up you go. And that is not the case. After landing is a completely new journey of still being on survival mode, trying to find home, build community, make connections, find work, and start life again. Not just for the first time after you leave your country, but some folks travel throughout so many different host countries before they come to Canada. And now I'm going to, because it's a very, very overall umbrella, I can go on, like I can write a whole book about this. So now I'm going to focus more on where we are with COVID. And we got to make hundreds of phone calls to refugee clients that we serve. And we got to learn that for all of them, their number one issue and problem and struggle at this time is their financial stability. Already, refugees were living in a world where they were underemployed or unemployed. Already, we were living in a place where, in Canada, where we see refugee architects doing something that is completely irrelevant to their profession. And even if someone gets to do something within their profession, they're starting off way, way lower than where they were before they come here. So their experience and expertise are not really being valued or invested in. With our work, we're trying to educate, support refugees in their career readiness, for them to navigate the system, as well as provide them with meaningful employment opportunities. And then on the other hand, when it comes to employers, we give the opportunity to work with a refugee-led organization and understand the values of working with refugees and having refugees in your staff, in your company. And then also we provide you with the tools to actually hire this refugee talent, vetted refugee talent, into your work to do what they are meant to do. Every $1 invested in Jumpstart's refugee talents mission and vision brings back $4.6 into Canadian economy in tax returns. So numbers speak. So the work is actually taking place. It's just that we are grassroots ourselves. We launched in 2016 in Toronto with a big influx of Syrian refugees. And now just within a few years, we are being able to drive an impact within Canada, but then also have that impact also kind of overflow into the international field and how refugees are integrated in economies. If I were to, again, stress on the most important thing for me is that being intentional. Yes, some of us are on decision-making tables, and some of the folks attending are maybe in a different position in their company. But we are, as individuals, all responsible, and we all have power to impact. So just like Canada is the leading country when it comes to resettling refugees in 2018 and 2019, and from how I see it, the private sponsorship program actually enabled just Canadian citizens and private, PR, permanent residents, sorry, English is not my first language, permanent residents in Canada, to take a step and say, you know what, there's something I can do about it. And then they came together and brought in refugees. And kind of similar to that model, for example, is our Welcome Talent Canada mentorship program, where it's for Canadian individuals, professionals say like, yes, I can help a refugee stand up on their feet, and I can be their career coach and volunteer a few hours of my time to help them see the industry from a Canadian lens, and get them to have the professional network, or like connect them with the right people that can help them put their foot into the door when it comes to their industry. So individuals have an impact. Organizations and corporations have the power to have an impact, and it's all about how we decide to take our next step forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Masa, very much. And you mentioned you have so much you could write a book. I would read that book, just so you know. So if you want to write the book, you've got at least one supporter right here. So John, I just want to ask you one question. Microsoft is clearly, from all you've said and all I know about the company, a global leader in LGBTQI inclusion, and you personally have been involved in seeing many of the changes over the past years. Could you give our audience an overview of the current landscape of the global movement of business leaders looking at ways the private sector specifically can advance equality and human rights for LGBTQI people? Where should Canadian companies, or like we've been talking about, individuals who want to be more involved, where should they be looking?
Sure. Listen, I think I sort of assume a number of folks are on the calls, play, counsels and advisors to their business partners and business leaders. And I go back to the comment you made before, Colin and Meg, around trust. And I think that's being those trusted advisors and counselors to your business leaders. And oftentimes that's bringing facts to a oftentimes confused or a misunderstanding of the environment in which our communities are operating around the world. Again, this is more from a multinational perspective, because our business leaders, operating locally, they're members of their community, and sometimes they bring their own, their own prejudices or own perspectives, and sort of may not necessarily understand what the actual law or regulations may be for them to do more, to be more active, to be more engaged. Clearly, if they've got to have the will to progress, but sometimes they just need the facts to understand that they're not going to put the business at risk. They're not going to put themselves at risk. But importantly, for what are the tools and assets and resources that they can marshal to be a leader as a leader, but also to sort of like help inspire others to take work as well. One thing we've done, and goes back to my former answer around this continuum from when in Rome to embassy to advocacy, is to really understand sort of what is the lay of the land when it comes to the policy and regulatory environments in those many countries in which we work. Now, we're not, present, deeply in 190 countries, but we have about 70 countries around the world where we have a fairly substantive, or substantial rather, employee base, or customer base, or just, a level of influence. And so in the last 2 years, what we've undertaken is sort of an analysis of, what are the legal conditions, what are the cultural conditions, and what are the regulatory conditions for our company to operate and to move up that continuum? When can we speak out versus when are we going to put employees at risk if we do so? What is the risk to employee for doing self-ID, for instance, in a country that, for instance, having that data alone couldn't put them at risk? And so we're making sure that as we think about our HR practices and policies, we're also mapping against what are the legal protections for our communities across the world. And so we've done that sort of that analysis of where the laws and our ambitions to move up that the continuum align. And one thing that we're also doing is just sharing that work. We've built a lot of that analysis on great work from other organizations such as ILGA, for instance, but better understanding sort of what is our posture in that particular country. And I would encourage others to sort of do that same analysis, just to make sure that their business, the local leaders, are empowered with the facts to be able to take some action and become more active and more advocates for the communities in the more challenging parts of the world. But we've seen the same sort of, let's call it misunderstanding of whether or not we can stand up for marriage equality in more, let's call it advanced and let's call it more embracing communities, not just the more challenging ones. And so we found it's very, very uneven when it comes to sort of those issues around the world. But I think I can't understate more intently the sort of the role for partnerships. I mean, you know, and I think just the sort of the contributors we have on this call today just underscore just how important partnerships are, because they can help us, particularly in those more challenging environments. You know, what is the right language, tone, and approach for a company like Microsoft, you know, who's not a national within their borders? No one elected us, you know, and so we have to take a balanced approach, particularly when there is a very big mistrust in terms of companies and organizations using their influence in local circumstances. We have to take a very nuanced approach. And so oftentimes those partners that we work with can take more action directly, you know, can, you know, be a voice for our issues. But more importantly, how do we empower them to become even greater change agents in those environments? And look, you know, I just congratulate Pride at Work for being, you know, emblematic of what it means to sort of bring, you know, companies together to be able to share best practice. One thing we have done, and I sit on the sort of the board, the advisory board of the Partnership for Global LGBTQI Equality, which is really an organization of business and civil society and academics and others across the world to really advance the United Nations UN standards for conduct for businesses to protect sort of LGBTIQ people. It's a mouthful, but anything in the UN normally has a very long title to it. But in summary, this is essentially what businesses can do to sort of apply standards around the world, whether or not it's around their supply chain to protect LGBTQI businesses or suppliers, protect their employees, to advocate in the external world, just to protect human rights. I mean, they're fairly, you know, sort of like, you know, basic in their terminology, but very ambitious in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And the PGLE is really sort of about how do we sort of bring together the voices of business, the experience of businesses, and it's always be a clearinghouse for what companies are doing to really sort of advance those UN standards. You know, I'm delighted that Scotiabank is one of those members from Canada. We're not a huge community. I think there's probably about 20 of us that have already signed up to become part of the PGLE and adopt the standards. And if anyone wants to either know more about the partnership or to sign up the standards, I'm happy to connect you with the team at the partnership, but also I'm happy to sort of like, you know, provide some more information. But again, I'll just sort of underscore, you know, this coalition that we can build between businesses, and again, I think today is a great example, can be really a potent force for change. And we've seen that whether or not it's around environmental standards or eliminating child labor in supply chains, that oftentimes it's bringing together these companies when we're sort of up against policy or you know, legal inertia, that really is an incredible, powerful change agent. And so, you know, there's an opportunity for companies to come together, to share best practices, to adopt best practices, and to create best practices. And I think, again, you know, the work that Pride at Work at Canada is doing is just incredibly emblematic of that.
Flattery will get you everywhere, John. Thank you very much. So the challenges that we're talking about today are not simple by any stretch of the imagination. And some of the work that you're talking about is very difficult. So one of the things, and I want to get to some questions that we have from our audience, but I just want to ask very quickly so that we can get to those audience questions. In like a sentence or two, like what is it that gives you hope in the work that you do? Masa, let's start with you.
Thank you. What gives me hope is that we recently launched our pilot tech arm of our Refugee Talent Hub, Hire Me, which is kind of the only hybrid model globally right now that uses both automated and manual intervention to connect employers who want to hire refugee talent and then connect them with refugee talent where they would have direct communication and interactions with the refugees. And then from our end and Jumpstart Refugee Talent, we support those refugees kind of on the back end with their kind of interview preps. We give with their resumes, with any and all the work that they need to support them in securing those positions that they qualify for. So we're just launched, and it gives me great hope that hopefully this will have an impact on how the system works when it comes to how refugees are very underrepresented in Canada and globally when it comes to their economic inclusion. Yeah, so I ask people to, if you are working in a place that would want to have refugees be part of your team, please get in touch with us. We will have demos for you to see the platform. We will, we're ready to onboard employers on the platform. We already have more than 200 skilled refugees in place, waiting to be served, so and to be hired. So yeah, do get in touch. We're trying to do great work, and we do need your support. It's all about partnerships, as John was saying. We connect bridges and we build bridges within the community. So yeah, it will be appreciated.
Amazing. Thank you, Masa. We'll make sure that our audience and Pride at Work Canada's members get access to that so they can share in that hope with you. John, what gives you hope?
Look, there's three things I think give me hope. Hopefully not only three, but three things that give me hope. One is that the challenges of coming together, in real life, has not, in some ways, been diminished by the inability to come together. I think Jason did a great job at the beginning, sort of saying that technology is sort of lowering the barriers to expression. Whether or not it's just simple things like background or photos, but I think even just the fact that we have so many people showing up to a call today that has not in some ways been sort of disintermediated by the fact that we can't shop in real life. In fact, I think we can sort of amplify the opportunities to come together if people are more happy in a digital first world. The second one is around allyship, and we've seen this here in the United States, but certainly it's not unique here. Is it just that the level of allyship that we're seeing across different diverse communities, and that whole idea of intersectionality sort of has been redefined in the last few months, and really sort of it's been harnessed as a real powerful level of a change and an accelerated change that people have been waiting sometimes decades and centuries to see. And I sort of hope that we also see that applied to our community as well. But finally, and maybe this is a little bit more abstract, is that I don't think I've seen it as much concerted effort and action by people to take care of others, as we've seen in the last few months. And while they can we can be overwhelmed by a lot of the news around hate and this frustration around the world, I also just haven't seen people being more taking an active interest in the health and welfare of others. And that's not just around masks and social distancing. I think there's probably a redefined sort of conversation around what it means to be thoughtful around the needs of others. And I hope that the pandemic doesn't stop with social distancing and masks and public health, that it really is applied to these very, very challenging and sometimes more systemic issues around equality.
Great, thank you, John. Meg, what gives you hope?
Well, what gives me hope is our partners. And so what I want to do is leave the last word to them. So we are going to watch a brief video from Pepe Julian Onziama from Sexual Minorities Uganda, who I think answers this question beautifully.
After all the work, the bashing, the pressures, the emotional labor and everything, one wonders what keeps me going, what keeps the community going. And my answer to that is love. Love for the work, love for the community, love for a partner. Whether you've been detained by police and mistreated, and you're able to break through those walls, those bars, and walk out and find a community waiting for you. They're there because of love. When you get home, and either it's your sister or your brother or your partner, you're only strong because there's love. And what keeps the community together is love. And love is empowering. Love is something that no homophobe, no transphobe, no hate group can take away from us. And love is power. Love is the power that is keeping us going.
Thank you very much for sharing that video, Meg. Did you have any comments about the video at all?
No, I think we just need to leave it there. I think Pepe says it beautifully.
Amazing. Thank you very much. So we did get a number of questions coming in the Q&A. Obviously, many more than we can have time to answer in the 5 minutes that remain. But there's a few that kind of jump out to me as important. If we could just very quickly get some thoughts on them. One of the questions that came through, and I think perhaps it's directed to John, but I encourage Meg and Masa to chime in as well. There's a question about capacity when it comes to leaders within organizations who, the question seems to focus on people not being able to keep up with their day-to-day work. And, how can some of the new responsibilities that folks are being given around diversity and inclusion be met when people already have so much on their plate? John, what do you think?
Gosh, I think if anything, this environment reminds us sort of like to be planful and to prioritize. I don't think that somehow diversity is a finite resource. I think that it is inexhaustible, and so in some ways, draw strength from that. So how you sort of like empower yourself and prioritize, because we don't want it to be a second or third tier issue. I think it's got to be sort of the first thing, because in some ways I think that, the circumstances at the moment remind us that it is the baseline on which we can all build. So in some ways, don't treat it as a sort of a second tier, treat it as the first, and hopefully everything might sort of coalesce around that in terms of your prioritization and sort of what you're going to put your energy into, because I think we're all sort of thinking about our expending of energy in a different way. So maybe that's just an aspirational thought to sort of like how to sort of maybe sort of use the time that we've all got.
Yeah, and I would encourage the questioner to check out some of Pride at Work Canada's programming, because we focus on this question of capacity a lot. So I want to make sure that we get to some of the other questions. And Masa, it strikes me because we have a couple of questions here from people who have identified themselves as refugees. So some of the conversations focused a lot on employers. And we've got some questions about where in Canada Jumpstart services are available, and what some good first steps would be for somebody who is a refugee who wants to get help from Jumpstart refugee talent. What would you say to those folks?
Perfect, thank you. So we are national, and yes, COVID has brought a lot of difficulties and struggles, but also it's enabled us to operate online. We are mainly based in Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary. So we're operating in 3 provinces. That being said, even if you're not within those provinces, go online, check our programs, sign up for them. With working online, we may be able to support you even though we're not physically there. So we encourage you to, whether you're a Canadian professional who wants to mentor refugees, whether you are a refugee who needs support, get in touch. We'll have a conversation and see how we can support. First steps is go to our website, rcjp.ca, check our programmings, sign up to fill in the intake form, and then a representative from the organization will call you, have a conversation with you, support you in kind of understanding your career path and what is it that you want to do, which industry is your desired industry to tap into, and then see how we can kind of enroll you in our different programmings to support you on your path.
Amazing. That is all the time that we have. I have to say, I'm so sorry that Doug wasn't able to be here with us today, and I certainly hope that I was able to meet the measure in terms of moderating today. If I missed anything to our audience, I sincerely apologize. And I have it on good authority that our 3 panelists do not turn into pumpkins after this presentation. And all 3 of them are accessible. I think I'm connected to all of them on LinkedIn. So if you do have questions, I encourage you to get in touch with our staff team at Pride at Work Canada or connect with our panelists. And thank you very much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work with all of you today. Angela, I just turn things over back to you.
Thank you so much, Colin. Wow, what a wonderfully inspiring panel about a critical balance between dialogue and action. With that, we will draw today's event to a close. Thank you so much, Colin, for stepping in for Pride at Work Canada and facilitating this really intelligent and inspiring talk. Thank you, Microsoft, for collaborating with us on this event. We really appreciate that. And most of all, I'd like to thank all our guests for attending. Our staff team works incredibly hard to put together events like this one. So we hope you learned something new. We'll be sending a feedback survey in the coming days. And it's my hope that you can share your honest feedback about today's event so that we can continue to do what's working and improve where necessary and continue this difficult collaboration where we can change the narratives so that we can act appropriately. Have a wonderful day and have a great week. Bye-bye.